Savannah Ellis, biography. If I said the name Norma Jean Mortensen, how many of you would know who I was talking about? Probably not very many. But if I said the name Marilyn Monroe, many of you may know who I was referring to. Today I will be telling you about the life Marilyn Monroe lived, and also how she died, and maybe some interesting facts you didn't know about her. To start, Marilyn Monroe was born as Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles, California, to Gladys Baker. Now you may be wondering where her last name Mortensen came from. When she was born, her mother listed her last name as Mortensen and her father as Edward Mortensen, even though it was very unlikely that he was actually her real father. In the beginning stages of her life, she lived a very happy and stable life. It wasn't long after that she was born, her mother decided that she was mentally and financially unprepared to have a child. Not long after, she gave Marilyn up for adoption and put her in the foster care system. The first foster home that she was introduced to was the home of Ida and Albert Bolender, whom her mother also lived with until she had to move closer to work. In the summer of 1933, at age 7, Marilyn's mother decided that she could care for her again and had her move into a home with her in Hollywood. They lived with a couple, Maud and George Atkinson, and their daughter. In 1934, Gladys, her mother, had a mental breakdown and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. She was unable to care for Marilyn at this time. Grace Goddard, one of her mother's best friends, and Doc, her husband, took care of her and her mother's affairs after she was placed in and out of hospitals after she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. In the next 4 years, she lived with many families. For the first 6 months, she lived with the Atkinsons, where she was sexually abused. In 1936, Grace became her legal guardian, but it wasn't until the summer of 1937 that she would be able to go actually live with them. Her stay with the Goddards was cut short when Doc Goddard, Grace's husband, also sexually abused her. She found a more permanent home living with Grace's aunt, Anna Lauer, but due to her poor health, had to go back to live with the Goddards. In early 1942, Doc Goddard's work relocated him, and they could not take Marilyn with them. As a solution to not having to go back to the orphanage, she married 21-year-old James Dowry on June 19, 1942, just after her 16th birthday. In April of 1944, Jim was shipped to the Pacific, where he would remain for the next 2 years. During this time, Marilyn lived with his family and worked at Radio Planes Munitions Factory. It is where she met photographer David Conover, who was sent to take morale-boosting photos of female workers in the industry. Marilyn quit her job to model for Conover and his friends. In August of 1945, she moved out and signed with the Blue Book Modeling Agency against her husband's wishes. She dyed and straightened her curly brunette hair blonde, and in September of 1946, she divorced Jim Dowry, who was against her working. In January of 1954, she married Joe DiMaggio, whom she had been seeing since 1952. Their marriage was very short-lived. In 1955, their divorce settled, and she began seeing Arthur Miller. In March of 1956, Marilyn changed her name, and in June she married Arthur Miller. In 1957, Marilyn fell pregnant, but the pregnancy was ectopic and had to be terminated. 1 year later, she miscarried. Her infertility problems were largely due to the fact that she had endometriosis, and which she suffered with most of her adult life. It was also during this time that she overdosed for the very first time. In January of 1961, Marilyn and Arthur Miller separated after filming The Misfits. The Misfits was the last film that Marilyn would ever complete in her short life. On the night of August 5th, 1962, her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, was staying at her home with her. She woke up around 3 a.m. and sensed that something was wrong. She walked down the hallway and she could see a light under the bedroom door, but the door was locked. She called Marilyn's psychiatrist, Ralph Greenson, who arrived shortly after and broke in the window, finding her dead only at age 36. She was pronounced dead at 3:50 a.m. Marilyn Monroe was an international star, and her death was the front page news in the United States and Europe. It was also said that the suicide rate in Los Angeles doubled the month after she died. Her funeral was held on August 8, 1962, at Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery, and she was later entombed in crypt number 24 at the Corridor of Memories.